I read a total of 30 books this year, and these are my favorites. I've deducted down to 7 books, one of which I was actually a bit reluctant about including, but I still think it is worth mentioning. I didn't really give myself any criteria as to how to choose out my favorite books, but these are the ones that I know for sure. 1, I would hope to reread in the future. 2, books that I will constantly and continuously think about. And lastly, books that made me feel or evoke a certain emotion as I was reading them. I originally planned to talk about my favorite books based on the order of when I read them. However, I thought it would be more fitting to talk about my very, very favorite books and then work my way down from there. So to start, Loved and Missed by Susie Boyd was my very first favorite book of 2025. This follows a 3-generational mother-daughter relationship. Ruth, the first-gen character, is trying to mend her relationships with her daughter Eleanor. There was an unfortunate circumstance that had occurred at the place that Eleanor was staying at, and as a result, Ruth went and gave a packet of money to Eleanor and decides to take Eleanor's daughter Lily into her care. This was such an interesting dynamic to read about, but it still covers the maternal relationships. It was witty and incisive, and I thought that the structure worked really well for the plot. I know that several people were not entirely satisfied with the structure, especially nearing the end. I think that's what made the book even more profound. And speaking of which, the prose is also extremely lighthearted for a plot and with characters so heartbreaking and devastating to read about. I think that was also another profound method of evoking these very upsetting and heart-wrenching emotions. You can tell with Ruth's perseverance of rekindling her relationship with her daughter is purely out of love, and even though she's not getting much response out of it, she still loves her daughter and her granddaughter so much. And I think that's actually quite present with all of the characters. They all love each other, however, they have so much remorse and guilt for not being in each other's lives, and it really just highlights the complexities of love, especially within a mother-daughter relationship. This title and this cover is so aptly fit. There was a quote, I don't know if it would deem as a spoiler. I'll still include it, I wouldn't count it as a spoiler, but it goes a little bit into depth about how the title came to be. I read it and I started tearing up. So heart-wrenching. Oh my gosh, just like thinking about it is making me so sad. Something interesting about the story was Eleanor's character. She does have several dialogues and moments in the book. She's almost like this ghost floating around in the story, but her presence is very, very profound because she's almost like this void between Ruth and Lily. She goes back and forth trying to rehabilitate herself and her life, but her addiction is stopping her from rekindling her relationships with her mother and her daughter. She's clearly the middle person in the story and also within the family, but she doesn't really have her own middle ground to stand on because her addiction is stopping her from doing so. And I found that to be very upsetting, but it is the reality for those who struggles with addiction. I highly recommend this. I haven't seen many video reviews on this book, surprisingly enough. I would give it a read. This was published in 2021. It is rather of a contemporary, newer release, but I have a feeling that this book could withstand the test of time. The second book that I want to talk about, I read it on my Kindle. It's Small Boat by Vincent Delacroix. This book was translated from French and based on a true story. A dinghy of migrants is stuck between the British and French waters, and due to negligence and miscommunication from the French authorities' part, 25 out of the 27 migrants on that dinghy had drowned and died. That is the context and the real scenario that had occurred, but the story itself follows a woman. She is the caller on duty for the French authorities at the moment and at the scene of the drowning. She is being interrogated by the investigator, and her responses are above and beyond. The interrogation was extremely horrid and intense, but the responses that this woman is giving to the interrogator or the investigator, it seems so morbidly out of pocket and out of sense from reality. You can tell that she is deflecting from taking any part of responsibility or accountability, and she's painted as this monster very early on. And actually, I would say that she continues to be that monster even up until the ending. And we as readers are quick to assume, quick to guess that this woman is a monster. Things that she's saying is so full of herself and also very privileged. She's blaming these migrants for putting themselves in this dire situation, and she's saying that they're the ones to blame, not her. However, it still deploys moral dilemmas, especially at the very beginning. The way that this book is structured, I don't know if this will count as a spoiler. Actually, I won't say it just because I feel like it would ruin the natural roller coaster of emotions that you would feel as you read it. But the structure is done in a way where we're questioning our personal morality, but the ending really just solidifies that this woman is morally unjust and clearly not the right person to be on duty, on call at the scene. We're questioning who are the real people at fault, the migrants who had placed themselves in that situation, or the authorities who miscommunicated and neglected the urgent cries that these people were asking for help. I like that this book did a fictional take on a real incident, a current one at that. I think the event had actually taken place in 2021. I didn't see many news articles about it, maybe because it was still peak COVID at the time. The book was also shortlisted for the International Booker Prize this year. It didn't win. I think Heartlamp won. I've seen many people guess that Small Boat would have been the winner. However, it's just urged me to read more books that had been longlisted or shortlisted for the International and the regular Booker Prize, and I'm excited to read more of those. Drive Your Plow Over the Bones of the Dead by Olga Tokarczuk. This is translated from Polish. The story follows Janina. She is an older woman studying astrology and translating poetry of William Blake. She discovers that her neighbor had been killed and a series of murders had taken place right afterwards. She's determined to find out who had been going on a killing spree, and she has an idea of who it might be. However, nobody's believing her. This was actually a book that I had finished reading recently. I would say only like 3 or 4 days ago, and it's in my 2025 yearly favorites. It was so good. I loved the characters, the story was so compelling, I just had to include it. And I actually borrowed it from the library, so I had to return it, but I wanted to film this video before I do. This was a tense, suspenseful, but also clever and witty read. Janina is a one-of-a-kind character. I've never read anything that is anywhere similar to Janina. She goes well into depth about astrology, spirituality, animals, and nature, and she has so much compassion and empathy for those 4 themes that it almost seems like she hates humans and the world, which is not entirely true, but she does see them as more superior than humans. However, that is clearly not the case because humans have control and power over almost everything. In actuality, Yanina is this recluse, eccentric woman who just happens to love nature and animals more than humans, and it is clear that these people that she's constantly interacting with can also see it right through her. There were passages of William Blake's poetry in this, which I thought was very fitting for a story like this. It was interesting to read about, and I'm not a huge poetry fan, but it did make me want to read some of William Blake's poetry and see how it kind of correlated to this book. Same with astrology. I'm not into astrology like that, but there were a lot of instances where Yanina went on this astrology tangent, and I found it to be quite fascinating, actually. So with a blend of that whodunit mystery, there's this philosophical and spiritual essence to this book, and it does raise the question of whether killing is a method of avenging. When is it right to kill? Is it right to kill? For what purposes? Humorous, ironic, snarky at times. The story takes place in a dark, wintry, remote Polish village. So if you're still on the lookout of a colder weather read, it is not too late to pick this one up. Next book that I want to talk about is The Vet's Daughter by Barbara Commons. I actually went a little bit into depth about my thoughts of this book in a past video. The Vet's Daughter follows Alice. She is a teenager living with a crass stepmother and abusive father who are both trying to refashion her into someone that she is not. And as she retreats herself from the world, she is finding bits of herself in her world and attains a magical ability of her own. I had mentioned how brilliant of a writer Commons is. I want to read all of her works. It almost feels fairy tale-like. There's this innocent take to it, but the plot, the characters, they're all sinister and harrowing. I also loved the ending. It was appalling and shocking, but I loved every second of it. This one shook me to the core. It was just weird, gothic, and I think that hint of magic realism really added to it. I would highly recommend this, especially for those who wants to get back into reading or start reading Perfume, The Story of a Murderer by Patrick Siskind. This book is translated from French. The story follows Grenouille. He has an outworldly sense of smell, and he exploits this magical gift of his to possess the one thing that he loves the most, the scent of young virgin girls. And to do so, he would murder them and encapsulate their scent through perfumery. This is a twisted, obsessive, dank read. I actually would suggest reading it over the summer. It feels so disgusting and sticky reading this. It's the best way I can describe it. And though it is horrifying, I think this is like a great summer ween book. Grenouille, he yearns for connection, and he also retreats himself from the world at one point. You can tell that he wants to fit in, but he sees himself as more superior than others because of his sense of smell. But then he also has this idea that other people don't like him because he has such a phenomenal sense of smell. I don't know, he's a very interesting character. The one thing I love about this book is the structure. We follow Grenouille's trials and tribulations. It's done so with such an alluring prose that it evokes so many different types of emotions. And I think there were 4 parts to this. It's dissected into this chronological order where we follow Grenouille's childhood, him as an apprentice, his way working up into the perfumery world, and him falling out, being in his own little world apart from others. This is a classic for a reason, and I would highly recommend it, especially for those who enjoys Fragrantica and perfumery. As someone who loves learning about perfumes, this story actually has a lot of fragrance terms, goes into depth about the chemistry of how perfume comes to be. And it's even more interesting to read about because this is taken place in the 18th century. So a lot of the terms that we here now are written in the story, but the way that this perfume is being made, there's a very stark difference. Another book that I really liked in 2025 was The Glass Castle by Jeanette Walls. This is a memoir about Jeanette Walls and her family. They are nomadic and struggling from poverty. As they try to make ends meet, Jeanette Walls is trying to understand parts of her family, her relationships with her mother and father, and it is clear that their dynamic, their relationship is dysfunctional. When sober, Jeanette's father is a charismatic, brilliant man, but as an alcoholic, he becomes very destructive and dishonest. Her mother, she despises change, and she also doesn't like the idea of being a mother, so she lashes that out on her children and doesn't really feel the need to take care of them as a mother. She's free-spirited, and even up until the very end, she chooses to be homeless rather than reconnecting with her family. Jeanette Walls has a knack for storytelling. This didn't even seem like a memoir. It felt like a fictional tale. As she's recounting her life, she's not necessarily self-pitying herself. We're following along Jeanette Walls' journey. And because she's reminiscing her life and her childhood, she doesn't really include many reflections or emotions that she has as an adult of her situation, which I thought would be a little bit more interesting to read about, but nevertheless, it was still a great book overall. And last but not least, the one book that I was hesitant about including. I don't know why I was hesitant about mentioning it. Maybe it's because it was the very first book that I read this year, but it still had a bit of an impact on my reading experiences and reading habits for the rest of this year. And it is I Hope This Doesn't Find You by Anne Liang. This is a YA romance. It's been a while since I've actually read YA and romance on top of that, so this was very pleasurable to read. The story follows Sadie, who is a academically driven student, top of her class, and she draws out her anger through hate emails. Her academic rival, Julius, is at the center of many of her hate emails, and somehow these emails gets spread to the entire school. And now the people at her school is finally seeing the truth of Sadie Wen. She's not the person that she claims to be, and it is clear that she is the type of student who is faking it till she makes it. Julius, on the other hand, is finally starting to appreciate the real Sadie and not the fake teacher's pet type of student, and the two of them start to connect in a way that they had never before. This is an academic rivals slash enemies to lovers trope. There's also slow burn, forced proximity included. So overall, this was tension done right. I will say there are moments and dialogues in this book where I felt a little cringed out, but I'd say that it works well just because the tension was there, the characters' relationship, and also the emerging romance. It was well written. Yeah, this was cute, and I think it is worthy of a read. I've read a lot of Anne Liang's books this year. I think I've read around 3 or 4. She does a great job at writing YA romances, which is why I kind of stuck to reading only Anne Liang's books. If you're interested, I would say it is worthy of a read. And that concludes my favorite reads of 2025. I am so grateful to be able to be finally back and part of the reading community. And this has been quite an accomplishment for me. It's urged me to create more videos and actually have a conversation with people who interact with my videos, to be talking to others who enjoys the same hobbies as me. And I hope you all have a wonderful 2025 and a wonderful 2026 ahead of you. Please let me know if you're reading anything for 2026, any plans for the books that you want to read, and also your favorite reads of 2025. I'm always curious and keen to learning about what others enjoy reading and some recommendations that I could possibly pick up in the future. Bye.